Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about was your book. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Reader,
See, this
so
is
congratulations.
Stephen. This is why even though you want a military dictatorship, I still like you. You flatter me.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't see...
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Zero Squared is the Zero Books podcast. Well, why don't we start with the bet? Because you and I, Stephen, you've been on the channel before. You were on for an interview right after the election, giving me your response to the election as a Trump supporter. I'm having you back because of the Capitol insurrection to see what your thoughts are now. And we had a bet that I put to you on Facebook, which was that if for some reason Trump held on to power, despite everything, you would win the bet. And that would include if he was no longer president, but managed to pick a successor.
I've heard that's a possibility.
Okay. So if that happens, you win the bet. If Biden is inaugurated and becomes president and has, however many days that he has in office, I mean, if he dies in office or is mentally unfit or something like that, I still win.
Okay.
But and here's the terms of the bet. If you win, I will go on this YouTube channel and apologize for misunderstanding the situation politically, and admit that Trump supporters like yourself had a better understanding of reality when it came to what the political outcome was going to be. And if I win, you will do the same. You'll come on this channel and you will apologize for having been wrong about political reality and having fallen into a fantasy. And I'll say the same thing. I'll admit I fall into some sort of liberal left fantasy, and that will be the resolution of the bet.
All right.
No more consequences than that. Just an apology for a mistake, and I'm looking forward to having you back for that apology. So,
all right.
Now, tell me who you think caused the insurrection, who was responsible for breaching the Capitol and breaking the windows and breaking in on Wednesday, the January 6th.
I think the important thing to focus on with that is how it was rushed through before they looked into it. So you had the impeachment almost before they even know what's going on. I mean, you heard about John Earl Solomon. They took into custody, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is Black Lives Matter. He was there, claimed to be observing and filming, but they have footage of him trying to egg on the riots. I think it's a very complicated situation. Now, I mean, if I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the games they're playing, and I'm thinking, okay, Trump has these people here, and the left knows that. So now the left is going to try to get someone to get them to get violent, which is counterproductive. And then maybe Trump knows that then. So then he sneaks the special forces in and gets Pelosi's laptop. So my conclusion is there's just a lot of mischief going on. You know, I mean, you got thousands of people there. It could come down to one rioter that gets everybody going and a handful of people. And, I saw footage of the cops letting them in. I heard about people, so half of them think they're tourists in there with their cameras taking pictures, staying inside the roped lines, like those velvet lines you have at the bank. They're not even actually getting outside the lines. They're just in there where the public goes and taking pictures. And then, somewhere else in the building, they're shooting people. So Just real confusion. I'm not going to say that there weren't Trump supporters that were there that got violent. I wouldn't condone violence, and I would condemn that behavior. But to impeach Trump over this, I think is ridiculous.
Okay, well, we can talk about the impeachment of Trump in a minute, but would you agree that Trump behaved at the very least irresponsibly when he told people to go to the Capitol and that he would be there with them, but then didn't appear there and did nothing to kind of control the tone and tenor of the crowd?
You know, if you look at the way this works, Twitter, you have 140 characters in a tweet. So if you look at the kind of the group of tweets that he had in there.
Yeah, but I'm talking about his speech that he gave where he directed people to go to the Capitol and told them at the speech that he would be there. He would be with them, and then didn't appear there and didn't take control of the situation at the Capitol.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to make the case, and Barnes talked about this, about the legal requirements that it would have to be.
I'm not talking about the legal requirements. I'm talking about just being a responsible politician. I'm not talking about whether he's criminally, culpable. I'm just talking about, would you think that a responsible politician who is leading a march like that and who tells his followers that he'll be at the Capitol with them is behaving responsibly when he instead goes home, watches it all on TV, and and lets it unfold as it will, and doesn't take charge of it?
Okay, well, I'll grant you that if you want. I think in general, I would say that Trump is not a really polished orator as we would kind of come to see in our politicians, the normal. I think there's a little hazard there. He's a little different with his words. But I think it's important to point out the gravity of what's going on. I mean, some of the other stuff I heard was that there were BLM type of things that were going to be going on, and Trump had people there to try to keep the peace. So there's a lot of things going on.
You mean at the Capitol that day there were BLM protests going on? Because I haven't heard that.
It was said there was supposed to be some other things going on, and that having people there might have dissuaded them from doing what they were doing, some kind of false flag. So, I have no idea. I've heard a lot of things.
Well, I mean, if Trump thought that there were going to be violent people there from whatever camp, one thing that he could have done was show up with his security and with his voice to direct the protests there and set a tone for it. The other thing I'll point out is that apparently while people were inside the Capitol, Trump tweeted out that something along the lines that Michael Pence had betrayed America and had failed to do his patriotic duty. And this was going on while people were in the Capitol, and there were shots being fired. And apparently after Trump tweeted that out, people started looking for Pence and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." So, Trump at that point had turned on his own vice president and sent a mob after him.
Well, let's back up a little bit. In the first place, I'll kind of grant you, if we consider the fact that there were special forces there and they got Pelosi's laptop, which is the word, then that would almost lead to the point where Trump is using civilians to mask some kind of operation, like they wanted to scare the senators out so they could get Pelosi's laptop or something. So again, there's just a lot going on.
Where are you getting this information about special forces being there and the laptop? Because I haven't heard that. So what's your source on that?
Just QAnon. I mean, various sources.
QAnon is. I have not found QAnon to be a very reliable source.
Yeah, and Barnes. I don't know if you listen to that Barnes take on it.
He thinks it's disinformation too, and I'm not a huge fan of Barnes, but
I'm a big fan of Barnes. So that again, I'll go back to the idea that I'm in the middle between the QAnon on the right and you on the left, and I'm trying to take it all in. But I'm just telling you what I've heard. But what I can't tell you is there's a lot of disinformation about what I'm hearing on the left about what QAnon is too.
Well, what did you think about the interview I did with Matt Bender last night? When we talked about you a little bit, and we talked about conspiracy theorists.
You've brought me up a couple times, and I've heard it, and you're always very generous and kind. So, Matt's a good example. Matt Bender, wasn't his name?
Matt Bender.
Matt Bender.
Like Bender, like the robot, Futurama.
Yeah, Matt strikes me. I found it interesting that he's thinks that the QAnon people are the deluded ones. When if QAnon's right, and I guess we'll see in our bet, because this is all supposed to go on pretty quickly, then the amount of delusion that is on that part, where the country's really falling apart here, and the left seems to have no idea.
Well, I mean, I think no one would dispute the idea, broadly stated, that the country is falling apart. Like everyone agrees that the country is doing very, very badly. And you can point in a dozen different directions. One place I would point to would be the number of deaths from COVID, and how poorly we've handled stopping the spread. And now there's a new version of COVID apparently that spreads even faster. Another place I would point is the jobs numbers and the unemployment that's coming along with COVID. The other place I would point is the apparent coming evictions that we can expect, and that may be slowly rolling out even as we speak. Beyond that, then you have the Capitol insurrection. You have this disputed election. The fact that everyone's in their own little fractured bubble, and there's no where to turn to just get objective, factual reporting. So, I agree that that the country is disintegrating. The question is why? What are we suffering from really? And who can we trust? And I don't think QAnon has demonstrated any there's no indication that the people who are putting out information around QAnon are in any way trustworthy. And so far, every single thing I've heard that came out of that universe has been fantastical and poor. I mean, at the very best, it's been poorly sourced and disreputable, and at the worst, it's been like something out of a science fiction movie. I mean, which I like that kind of stuff, but I don't tend to think of it in terms of reality, or try not to. Only on the weekends after a few drinks do I allow myself to consider the idea that there's a yellow cube somewhere that can predict and control the future. Anyhow, but what is it about the QAnon story that you find remotely plausible? This is a moment where if you say something, I may very well get thrown off of YouTube, but go ahead. We'll see what happens, crossing our fingers. Go ahead.
QAnon, as I understand it, is something that came about that started at the Kennedy assassination, where you had generals. Kennedy was trying to overthrow the Fed, and the CIA killed him allegedly, and so that was a failed attempt. And QAnon started then. That was 1963. So they've been working at this all.
You're talking about the Federal Reserve?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, we mentioned this. We talked about this before in our first interview, where I talked about how Trump was an outlet, so they didn't have to overthrow the government. And so now that's kind of still back in play. That is what they say is going to happen, like tomorrow. So, I mean, we're going to find out really quick if this is some kind of elaborate scheme, hoax to keep these people, or if we're going to have a World War III tomorrow. So it's supposed to start tomorrow, and it's supposed to ramp up. And so you probably won't be able to get this out.
I'm going to put it out tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yeah.
So maybe you can get it out before the electricity goes out.
Yeah. I don't think electricity will go out. But look, yeah, I mean, I plan on putting this out tomorrow, releasing this tomorrow. I was going to be making a Critical Cuts video on the Capitol insurrection, and then I for a variety of reasons couldn't produce the essay fast enough, and so this will go out instead tomorrow. You're talking about tomorrow being the day where everything falls apart, where there's that you said the electricity might go out. I've heard that every capital and every state will be under siege from Trump supporters. However you want to characterize them. That's a plan that's in the works. And you think that this is in a war basically on a group of elites who are controlling the economy primarily, through, but more than that as well, or at least QAnon would say that this is a war against a group of elites who are controlling the economy and our political system, both with the power of the Federal Reserve behind them. That's what you would say. Now, I've heard conspiracy theories around the Federal Reserve for over a decade. That tends to be a focus of the extreme right, is the Federal Reserve. I'm not a fan of the Federal Reserve per se, but I wouldn't point to the Federal Reserve as the primary source of economic disruption in the world. I tend to think that there's a systemic, that the cycles of booms and busts is built into the system. However you do banking, you can make it worse or better based on your banking policies and financial policies and interest rates and things like that. But ultimately, the cycle of booms and busts is just built into the kind of productive system and the value that we produce and all of that. I mean, I have my Marxist theory about it.
Yeah, and I would certainly disagree. We get into the MMT thing then, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, MMT is not Marxist. That's a counter theory. Have you seen the movie Network? Patty Chad movie, and it's about a network, a TV network, and a news anchor who's forced to retire because ratings are down, and who goes crazy, and he threatens to kill himself on live TV on his last broadcast, and he also implores the people of America to stand up, open their windows, and shout, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore."
Who was in this? Who was it?
The cast of I should look it up. Network movie cast. I should know these names off the top of my head. Peter Finch, Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Ned Beatty, Robert Duvall, 1976 movie. And in it, Howard Beale, by doing this, he saves his job. He becomes a network hit. The new executives push him and promote him more than ever. But the owner of the network, a big oil tycoon, takes an interest in him and calls him to his house to have a meeting. And in the meeting, he says, because he's upset with Howard Beale because Howard Beale is talking about the Arab takeover of America. Saudis are coming in and buying up everything, and they this used to be America, and now it's not America anymore. And so this rich oil tycoon, played by Ned Beatty, takes him to. Here, I'm going to read you the speech. Hold on one second. It says, "You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? You think you've merely stopped a business deal. That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is the ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. one vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars, petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature, and you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There's only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality. One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused. And I have chosen you, Mr. Beale, to preach this evangel. And Beale says, but why me? Because you're on television, dummy. 60 million people watch you every night of the week, Monday through Friday. So that's from 1976.
Huh?
And things have not changed all so much. And I tend to think that Ned Beatty in that picture is the realist. But that the task for people today is to overcome that system of systems, and that the only people who can do it are workers. Eventually, but I think that it's important to remember that these problems and these stories and this feeling of losing America has been going on since you and I were little kids.
Well, it's the guy we talked about, Peter Schiff. I mean, he says that between basically the two world wars, things are pretty good. Yeah. Or no, wait a second.
Yeah, right. No, you mean after World War II, until Vietnam, things were pretty good.
I think he's saying after World War I till
1929.
Right. No, it was after, with the exception of the war. But then,
yeah, after World War II, things were okay. There was a boom after World War II until around 1975 or so.
Well, yeah, so that's when we went off the gold standard. So
it didn't happen because we went off the gold standard. We went off the gold standard because it happened. Because it was a way of mitigating and managing the problems that were arising after this boom after World War II.
Well, we're getting away from sound money. And so, money and
this was a kind of Keynesian monetary solution for an economic crisis, which after World War II, the leaders of the world thought we could not be allowed to be suffered without massive intervention. Because after what happens in the economic crisis that was the Great Depression, brought on a cataclysmic war that threatened human existence. Right? So now you have, with the nuclear bomb, and the masses of millions killed. So now you have the leaders of the world saying, well, we cannot allow that to go unchecked again. We cannot allow the market and the crisis to manage itself. We will have to intervene through Keynesian spending and monetary policy and so forth. And then that fell apart. Well, that fell apart. So that was what was going on after World War II, right? And that fell apart. And then you had a return to the market in the late 70s and 80s, with Jimmy Carter being the first one out the door for neoliberalism, then Ronald Reagan, then Bill Clinton. It's a bipartisan effort to deregulate and expand international trade. And that was a neoliberal era, which was a return to competition with a lot of state assistance, though, right? It's like we will prop up our industries. And
I mean, certainly the sound money people would disagree. I mean, overall, the way to look at this is the gold was a way to tether finance, to keep people from meddling. And once that influence was gone, then it took off. And you can look at a graph and just show it didn't really start the hockey stick till probably
we're talking about state spending going up after we went off the gold standard.
So yeah, I mean that's what all this would be about is the debt.
Right. Financialization and state spending and the creation of fictitious capital, has been a way to kick the can down the road in order to stave off of massive devaluation of capital. And in order to hold on to an international order which wouldn't go to war with itself.
But you're talking about these.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You're talking about these boom and bust cycles that are around this money. I mean, you have an empire. They come up. They take control of the money. It lasts 250 years. They get way in debt, and then it crashes.
But you got in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the gold standard was what small businessmen blamed for their troubles, because they said, because the gold standard, because gold was going up in value, and so you had deflation, right? And so that meant that that everything they owed for having borrowed to the small farmers, everything they owed when they borrowed money to expand their farms, now was much more. The dollar went further, so they owed more than they would when they originally borrowed. Inflation would have been good for them, because then that meant the debts that they had would go down in value.
Well, it's a problem because
they wanted silver currency. They wanted to expand what kind of currency would count. The populists did. The small farmers and small businessmen back in the 19th century, they wanted to expand what would count as currency and expand how much currency was out there in order to help them get out of debt back in the late 19th century. So these things don't stay fixed, and who you blame and the idea that the gold standard is some sort of manna from heaven for the small businessman is relatively new. And it's only because of the conditions that we have now that's happening.
It's complicated. And because of that, I mean, I'm not, if you try to put the genie back in the bottle almost, I'm not sure how that would work.
I remember when we started talking on Facebook about having this conversation, what I said to you is, let's not talk about the economics because we don't want to waste our time with that. And instead, that's what we've been talking about the whole time. So let's go back to the fun, scary stuff about, how everything's going to fall off a cliff tomorrow. Let's just say this, if it's true that what you just said is true, it's complicated and it's not easy to understand. And the story and the narratives that are put forward are simplifications to an extreme degree, and that neither you or I are actually in a position to render like a clear and final judgment on the state of the world and how the economy works, right? So, do you think that in that state, people are justified to storm their state capital? Because,
Actually, I do.
Okay, all right. Tell me why.
Well, because what I think is so important is there's a truth that underlines this. So, and again, I don't want to condone violence, but
right.
I'll put forward a hypothetical legal situation where what they did was justified. Meaning that if let's assume that the Chinese rigged the election. Okay.
Well, okay. I don't think we can assume that, but at all. I haven't seen even one shred of evidence of Chinese intervention in this election, not even on the level of like Russian troll farms or something like that. But I haven't heard about that, and that wouldn't justify it at all. By the way, So you're talking about through Dominion voting machines that they rigged the election?
Yeah,
okay. Well, that's
so
obviously not. But Stephen, that's obviously not true, because if you look into the Dominion voting machine stories, they don't hold up. There are claims made about Dominion voting machines flipping votes in places where they didn't use the machine. In Georgia, they had recounts that didn't involve the machines. So it isn't true that Dominion voting machines flipped the election.
I really didn't want to get into the weeds about the.
Well, I'm
the
just saying,
election
like, there is no good evidence for Chinese intervention.
According to what the QAnon story is, all this is basically going forward on the idea that this is no longer about election fraud anymore. This is about what they know for a fact that the Chinese did to try to take over the election. So, as I understand it, they have rock solid proof that the Chinese tipped the election, which is why they're going to be able to use the Insurrection Act and the executive order that Trump wrote in 2018 to overturn the elections. So that's.
Do you think Biden is going to have a different kind of foreign policy towards the Chinese than
I don't
Trump?
think Biden's
well,
going to be in jail.
If he did, if Biden's okay, right? But if Biden were to be president, do you think that his foreign policy would be markedly different from Trump's?
Yeah, absolutely. Because he's bought and paid for with the Chinese, and we get back to the difference. Trump is trying to reissue the Constitution, give power back to the people, give power back to the states, decentralize. Biden is on board with the Great Reset, which we talked about the three things: the abolishment of private property, rationing of goods, for climate change. And it's interesting too that the Klaus's version of the Great Reset is all about climate change and kind of conserving, which is different than the traditional kind of idea of the Great Reset, which is more around restarting the currency. Although it's probably, Klaus's version is probably going to kind of encompass that too, because it's going to implode. We're not, we can't sustain this. So they're going to have to restart it. And of course, the people are going to pay for it, not the rich people. The elites will figure it out to where they'll consolidate, they'll get theirs, and half the world will starve.
Well, now, my opinion about, just to talk about the reset for a moment, my opinion about the reset is that it is a branding exercise, a marketing exercise that the banks and the financial industry are putting forward in order to avoid any kind of radical reform or change, and they'd be able to continue doing the kinds of things that they've been doing now. It's like the oil companies going green. They paint green on their company, but they don't fundamentally change their policies. They're not really environmentalists, but they give themselves a sheen of environmentalism. Well, I think the same thing's going on with the Great Reset, and to the extent that they're
Green New Deal, you kind of be for that. You think that?
I'm not talking about the Green New Deal. I'm just talking about oil companies saying they're green. I didn't mention the Green New Deal.
I think Trump really made a huge difference. As a matter of fact, and we're getting back into conspiracy theory, kind of looks at it now. The conspiracy QAnon people would say that they needed a war to facilitate the Great Reset. That you kind of need that call to enforce rationing. It's not something you could just levy on people without having some big excuse. We could.
I'll look into that. What I'm going to do is just get rid of everything else, because I've had real trouble around COVID stuff on YouTube. Yeah. So let's talk about the censorship. Look, I just want to say, I don't think that there is evidence to support storming the state capitals or the capital of the United States in an effort to hold on to this reality TV star as our president. That seems insane to me. And I think that the evidence that's been presented for voter fraud and for the idea that COVID-19 was some sort of conspiracy is thin at best. But But what I will say is that everything that's going on has accelerated the loss of civil liberties in this country, which we've been experiencing since 9/11. And we are looking at a very authoritarian future. So it's hard for me to just completely discount people's concerns about the state and the desire to go against the state. But the reasons given are just not at all convincing to me. So anyway, I'll let you talk about the censorship and the authoritarianism that you see.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to me, they used the 230 to create a public forum. And then as soon as they became the public forum, they turned around and shut it down. Well, the 230 was to keep them from getting sued for stuff being put on their platform. Like a publisher would have the responsibility. They were relieved of that responsibility through this article. But the whole point of that was so they weren't taking stuff down. They didn't have to take something down because they wouldn't be held legally liable. So the solution is just to not take things down. I mean, basically,
you're right, but they were protected from criminal liability, but they were also given the power to take things down.
Well, there's still decency things involved. We don't want. So they did have the power to take things down, but they pledged to be a forum for free speech. That was the whole point. And so they get, and so this is typical of the monopoly. Everybody says they're going to behave. Everybody's, we don't need competition. We'll be fine. But then the minute they get that power, what do? They betray us.
Well, I think that you're right that right now the big tech companies are having it both ways, and that it's very dangerous for the country to have a few corporations control, not just like, let's say, all the newspapers or all the television stations, but this amounts to controlling like the phone lines. This amounts to controlling the way people talk to their neighbors or their family. So I'm with you that's got to change. That the idea that Twitter or Facebook or YouTube even should be able to set the terms of political debate, not just for as a mass broadcasting kind of thing, but just even the way people talk to one another is out of control. But again, I don't think that that keeping Trump in office would have done much to stop that. He didn't change that, and things got worse when he was in office.
Yeah, I would disagree with that too.
I mean, in 2017 is when Google changed its policies so that rather when you ran a search, the more powerful corporations were at the top rather than
they were
links or
Google was changing algorithms to get Hillary Clinton elected. It was subtle, but
that's 2017 after Trump was already elected.
But this was going on before the 2016 election, that they were floating Clinton's
well, maybe, but I'm saying the actual policy changes that you can document happened in 2017.
But what's undeniable is who is supporting the candidate. You have big tech and big media. It's undeniable that their candidate is Biden. There's a reason for that. Trump is the one fighting to get free speech. So
Trump has always been real uneven on free speech. He's not a really good defender of free speech.
Trump is really not subtle. He's like a bull in the china shop, and which again I find interesting. We talked about this last time, where he actually is using government power to de-escalate government power. But when it comes to using it, he uses what he's got, and he's not subtle about it. So I think that's an issue. But that's the thing. When we have two choices, you have to put up with the choice, warts and all. I mean, Trump is certainly not an ideal solution. A lot of people don't want him to be president. He didn't want to be president. He only stepped in because he thought that there was no other choice, and I would agree with that based on what I'm seeing going on now.
It seemed to me that he ran for president as a marketing ploy, like a way to build up his image and help him in his media efforts. And then he got unlucky enough to win.
But I suppose that depends on how much credence you give to the fact that he was running with the QAnon with the support of the generals from the start. That this was kind of a plan.
I mean, again, that's the QAnon story just has never. I've never found one well-sourced, reputable accusation or claim coming from the QAnon sector at all. And to me, the whole idea that he was put in there by, somehow the generals who were supposed to trust more than we trust elected politicians, and who are somehow noble, the people who brought us into, several illegal wars, including the most recently the war in Iraq. These are the guys that are going to save us from global elites or the banking sector. I don't know. I mean,
that gets tough. Certainly, the upper level generals are in with the elites, and that's kind of a problem. I mean, as we look to Trump militarily taking over the country, there'll be. I'm almost wondering if you won't have troops.
To me, the most un-American thing
there to protect
I can imagine is the most un-American thing I can imagine is a military dictatorship. That's like the least democratic, least patriotic, most.
It's not about it.
It's un-American thing.
But it's not about that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not about that. Their goal is to reinstate the Constitution, to give power back to the people. So this is the choice. Trump is saying we're going to give power back to the people. That's the goal. The Biden is saying we're going to give power to the Great Reset. We're giving power to the UN and Klaus in German. We're going to take the private property away. We're going to ration because we think global warming is a problem. And we're going to give away the sovereignty of the United States. So that's the choice. That's
all right. Well, all right. So I think this has been an enlightening conversation. I probably didn't let you talk enough. But on the other hand, I may have let you talk too freaking much. But what I'll say is that. Go ahead.
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about was your book. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
And the whole reason I wanted to talk to you in person about it is because I needed to bring up the fact that I am a hardcore bibliophile.
Oh, yeah.
So and this is something that I wanted to talk to you have a lot of young listeners out there.
Mm-hmm.
I might be the most well-read person that you've ever met. That's a big claim. Don't edit me out of my big claims. Don't leave me hanging.
I'll leave you that. You're the most well-read person I've ever met.
So, and the way I do it is I cheat. I'm into audiobooks.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there were times I used to plow the roads here in Indiana. There were times when I was doing 16-hour shifts where I'd be listening to audiobooks for 16 hours. And what I do, and this is what's so important, what I'd like to get across to your audience, you ever have those nights when you can't sleep, your mind is racing, and you just can't stop thinking about things?
More and more lately, yeah.
I have found that if you listen to an audiobook at night, if you can find an audiobook that's good enough to distract your attention from what you're worrying about, put you right out. So for about between 15 and 20 years, I've been using audiobooks to help myself sleep.
So this is where we plug Audible. If we only had a sponsorship,
There you go.
Oh, their link up and they could go and get. But you listened to this as an audiobook, back.
No, I read it.
You read it. Okay.
So I was a voracious reader before I kind of found audiobooks. It was around 2000.
It is available on Audible, though, if people want to read it or listen to it. This book is on Audible. But anyhow, go ahead.
All right. So the point is that I've read like thousands of books. I read 2 books a week for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Just to sleep. That's not including the other stuff.
Yeah. So
what my point is that I'm a very jaded. It's really hard to find something because I prefer audiobooks. And you know, it's pretty hard to find something that I would actually read in real anymore, because the only reason I would read is if I can't get it on audiobook, or if it's so dense that it is tough to get through something like Marx, or you know. So I read your book because I happened to find it in the library, and that's another thing. I get people who like pretend they're artists or authors, and if I can't find your book in the library, then you're not a real author to me. You know, if you haven't made it big enough to get into my library. So I checked you out at the library, and you were there, and I read the book. And even as someone who's as jaded as I am, and probably wouldn't pick up a book, I read yours because I knew you, and it really expresses your personality well. It is really unique. So it was excellent, and it was enough to keep my attention as a very jaded reader.
See, this is Stephen. This is why even though you want a military dictatorship, I still like you. You flatter me. All right. Well, let's leave it there. I'll probably maybe clip that out and put it at the start. Look, and I will have you back in like a week and a half, 2 weeks, when you have to apologize to
him. We'll see. It's going to happen. But the other thing I've never done is thank you for having me on, because we always kind of start. So I wanted to definitely thank you. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. And I hope you have me on again.
Yeah. And I hope that when I do have you on again, that we're still living in a democracy.
I hope so too.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.